This is a really tough conversation to have without irritating some people, without ruffling some feathers, and without bringing out kind of, the worst parts of our gaming community and gaming industry. But I think it's one that's important to have because part of this is being misrepresented and misstated. And I always like to talk about the truth and the facts. And then part of this is just very interesting of what we value and what we want going forward. Now, the Nintendo Switch 2 stuff has been all over the place and everywhere. You've heard reports of the 8-inch screen, the 512 gigs of memory, you've heard the late 2024 launch. But one element that I think is being overlooked here in this conversation is what third-party developers have been saying about backwards compatibility. And it's being completely misreported. And I think we've got to go over it so that we set the stage straight and can explain exactly what's going on here. What's going on, everybody? It's Zach from SwitchForce. It sounds like third-party developers are trying to sabotage backwards compatibility because they want to resell you their same games again. Now, that's what happened in the Switch era, right? We brought over some Nintendo Wii U games, and we brought over plenty of games from past consoles and other generations from third parties, and they sold them to us. And now it's being reported that third parties do not want backwards compatibility so they can sell you old games again. This is where it's just completely being misreported and misquoted, okay? So this comes from Eurogamer. This is where the incorrect quote comes from. Eurogamer had a nice article corroborating some of their sources with VGC about the Switch 2 stuff, but they completely misquote this by saying, VGC states that some third-party publishers have suggested including backwards compatibility could cannibalize their ability to resell older games on Nintendo's new hardware. Again, what I just described, right? This idea that if you have it be backwards compatible, we can't repackage Witcher 3 for Switch 2. We can't repackage, Dark Souls 1 again for Switch 2 because they could just pop it in. But in fact, that is not what's being said at all, and that's not what VGC reported from their sources whatsoever. You're being fed bad info here. Because in fact, what VGC said third parties have told them is that they are concerned that backwards compatibility and legacy support for Switch games could negatively affect the sales of next-gen titles. So this is still third-party concern, and they still don't want backwards compatibility, but for totally different reasons. The first one sounds awful. Nobody wants to be resold the same games. The second one is a debate and dilemma we've experienced for the last 3 years with PlayStation and Xbox, where having backwards compatibility, having a direct connection to the past console, really does limit what you can do on the next-gen front. Now, Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be in a unique boat because they have a tough decision. And I want to know what you think is worse or better, or what you'd prefer. I'm assuming most people prefer backwards compatibility because then your entire library comes with you, you have already a huge library at the start, and you're able to ditch your Switch and put that money towards a Switch 2 or give it to a friend, a younger sibling, or something of the sort. But the dilemma and the issue there, and what third parties are raising concern about, is how do you sell next-gen titles when people can still buy and play Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, still buy and play Tears of the Kingdom, still buy and play Mario Odyssey, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Mario RPG, Mario Bros. Wonder, and plenty more. We've seen this limit Xbox and PlayStation, especially in terms of pushing next-gen only games, right? We're just finally seeing games that are only on the newest consoles. It's far beyond the next-gen period because now it's just 3 years into this gen, and we're finally abandoning, in some capacity, the past consoles. I know it's a dicey discussion, and I know that it's tricky to think about abandoning the past support and leaving that on the Switch. But I do empathize with what the third parties are saying here because it does make it harder to push next-gen software when you have so many options. The other part of this is if you have to make it backwards compatible with Switch, if you're trying to make these games work across, like how deep does that go? Is it just that Switch 1 games can play on Switch 2? Or is it the Xbox Series X and Series S thing where Switch 2 games have to also run on Switch 1? Because then we're hyper limiting everything, and I think that latter option is a terrible idea. The Switch 1 is so back in the archaic ages in comparison to what the Switch 2 will be. There's no way that we should be allowing Switch 2 games to play on Switch 1. I do not believe that would be good or healthy or wonderful. I know that might be tough to swallow for some people that don't feel the desire, the need, or even have the ability to upgrade, but we're not going to be able to have games that take advantage of the Switch 2 hardware if we have to scale and port back to the Switch 1. We've seen developers frustrated with this on the Xbox side of things, and they will be more frustrated in the Switch because the Switch 1 is way worse than the Xbox Series S. We're going to seriously hamstring ourselves if we make backwards compatibility work in that way where Switch 2 have to go back. Now, if we just allow the Switch 1 library to play on the Switch 2 so that your catalog carries over, Nintendo will be totally fine. They put out a new 3D Mario, Metroid Prime 4, whatever they put out, the next Zelda, Animal Crossing, boom, you're going to be all over it. But now they're saying that you got to compete with not only Nintendo's current slate, which is tough for third parties. We see it every generation. No matter what the graphical capabilities are, no matter when the console comes out, third parties struggle on Switch because the first party lineup is so strong and so huge. So we now have this issue where they got to compete with current gen Nintendo and last gen Nintendo, and it makes it more difficult for third parties to push their software. Early on in the cycle, it's going to be incredibly important that third parties get on board, get support, and get a lot of sales. I know that it's not the most frugal thing to do, but there's a part of me that thinks no backwards compatibility will in fact set the Switch 2 up to be way better. And I think you got to think long term here. We've had the Switch for 7 years. It's going to be almost 8 years when we get the new console. And then if that lasts for another 7 or 8 years, do you really want those back 4 or 5 years to be hamstrung and tied to the last console? And how often will you go back and play games from 10, 12, 14, 16 years ago? You know what I'm saying? At that point, maybe we do just leave Switch behind. Now, I don't believe Nintendo wants to do this or will do this because they have a huge install base. 129 million pieces of hardware sold. We just got that report. They do not want to break that apart. And that's what PlayStation and Xbox and everybody tried to do with their cross-gen releases, and it did not work. So I think Nintendo will opt for a smarter strategy of either, hey, it's a complete separation, Switch 2, you gotta get the Switch 2 games. Or, what I think they'll actually do is opt for Switch 1 works on Switch 2, but you can't play Switch 2 on Switch 1. Because we also have so many systems that are intertwined, I don't think they can do a straight cut, slice the knife, and separate these two systems entirely. It's part of a Switch family. We have the eShop and all those purchases. We have Nintendo Switch Online that we know is an incredibly important thing to Nintendo, especially as we move forward, and they'll want to keep that base intact in all those games going forward. It would be weird to say, oh, all of your eShop stuff carries over, all of your downloads carry over, but your physical can't. I just think that gets messy. Oh, all of the NSO games carry over, but the old games can't. And then how do you even do like, oh, your Mario Kart 8 Deluxe DLC doesn't work on the Switch 2 because that game can't come over? I think we're going to look at a scenario where developers on the third-party front are going to have to suck it up and do their best to make compelling, interesting, appealing titles and trust that by supporting the system early, it will benefit them in the long run. I feel like a lot of the third parties that supported the Switch early on have seen rewards. They've reaped the rewards and benefits as we've progressed, and the companies that abandoned early have never found much of a footing. So yes, Nintendo will be bringing, in my opinion, their back catalog forward to the Switch 2. But without having to worry about backtracking and back planning your game, these developers can take advantage of the finest graphics and performance that the Switch 2 can provide. And while Nintendo will definitely be taking advantage themselves, there is something to say for being able to play major third-party franchises that maybe more heavily focus on visual fidelity over art style and would be such an appealing twist on Switch 2 after missing out on Switch 1 or just looking mucky, ugly, and not something too desirable. I think we're going to see a scenario where backwards compatibility is in, but we're not going to have the cross-gen period. We'll have the best of both worlds, backwards compatibility, but also a next-gen focus. And they'll continue to release some Switch games because they're playable on both, but Switch 2 games won't go back. Or maybe Nintendo being crazy will do something very odd and make a clean break, or maybe they'll make everything scale back and forth. I'm not sure, but it's interesting how they're trying to paint third parties incorrectly by saying they want to resell their old games. I don't think that's going to happen. They know they have to compete with Nintendo and a whole bunch of new first-party IP. They're not going to just try to resell you stuff. If they attempt to do that, it'll be a long road for third parties, and it'll be a boring road for us Nintendo Switch 2 owners as we get old game after old game that we've already been exposed to. Especially Nintendo allows that back catalog to go. I think they will. I think it's a very poor marketing move and bad mindshare to say, ha, all your stuff you bought, insane software numbers, record-setting sales, you can't carry it over. I think they'll allow for it. I think they'll encourage it. And I think we're going to have a fantastic Switch 2. But let me know your take, and if you're surprised that Eurogamer was reporting this so incorrectly, in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, stay positive out there. And until next time, SwitchForce out.